Hello folks, this week saw the launch of what is the final feature of patch 11.1.5, ironically arriving just the day after the release date for patch 11.1.7 was announced, which for me kinda sums up how poorly paced the patch 11.1.5 content has turned out to be. Patch 11.1.7, the Legacy of Arathor, is set to launch on June the 17th for North America and June the 18th for Europe. This patch will see a brand new campaign storyline, which sees Faerun Lothar and Danath Trollbane try to avert rising tensions between the Alliance and the Horde in the Arathi Highlands, along with a brand new story recap system called Lore Walking, with Lore Walker Cho offering us a choice of storylines which blend together old content quest lines and some new quests and scenarios to provide a recap for some key lore moments. And along with that, we're also getting the addition, finally, of Battle for Azeroth to the Time Walking rotation, with 2 brand new mounts on the vendor and the return of the Turbulent Timeways event, which this time around will be awarding the long-desired Infinite Pirate Dragon mount. The main new gameplay feature is Overcharged Delves, which sees the addition of new challenges to a selection of 6 of the delves, along with a delve-only upgrade tree and a brand new waste, which will be upgradable to item level 694. Yes, a Cersei circlet-like mechanic is making a return. And a little later on in the patch, we'll be seeing the return of the Diablo crossover event, the Greedy Emissary, which will have a bunch of new rewards to earn, along with some additional reward drops from legacy dungeons and raids. And the ongoing process of adding new functionality into the game's default user interface is set to continue with the new Combat Assistant. This is similar to rotational helper add-ons like Hikili, which provide recommendations in which ability to use next. And we're also going to get a new single button assistant, which offers a brand new ability which will automatically cast whichever ability the combat assistant recommends for you. The good news is that the majority of the content in this new patch is going to be going live on day 1, with only the Greedy Emissary event launching later on July the 1st. As a recurring event, this does make a lot more sense to be something that isn't directly linked to the patch's launch, and should hopefully feel a lot better than the delayed launch of Horrific Visions in 11.1.5 did for many players. I'm going to be releasing a full in-depth guide to the new patch and its content this coming Monday, followed a little later on with a full guide to the new Overcharged Delves feature and associated upgrade tree, so do make sure to hit subscribe right now before you forget, so that you don't miss out when those videos eventually go live. Turning back to the Dastardly Duos, this mini boss rush event where we fight old dungeon bosses in pairs to accumulate a high score has seen a few changes since it was tested on the PTR, with players now being synced down to item level 619, which does kinda make sense as it tends to level the playing field for folks who are vying for that high score. Unfortunately, this scaling combined with some tuning changes has significantly slowed down the fights. During PTR testing, I found the fights to be very fast paced and quite anarchic feeling, and I had quite a lot of fun with it. Sadly, these scaling changes do mean that the fights now take quite a bit longer, and this in my view has brought the lack of mechanical depth of these old bosses to the fore, making the event feel a lot more grindy. For solo players, this is being exacerbated by the follower NPC's AI not being super well suited for the event, especially for DPS and healers, where the tank's positioning really cannot be controlled. When the event launched, players quickly discovered that old expansion gear, especially old legendaries, could be scaled up to item level 619, enabling the creation of some extremely overpowered builds. This was quickly hotfixed out by the developers, but unfortunately the fix has introduced another bug, where players' gear is now being scaled down to the lowest item level piece that you have equipped, which if you have a shirt or tabard equipped ends up being item level 1. As you can imagine, trying to do the event with an item level of 1 does not work out very well. Another issue with the event is that following the launch of the Turbo Boost feature, which has significantly increased gear acquisition even for alts, the veteran track gear which drops from the event kinda feels irrelevant, meaning that for players who aren't very interested in pushing for high scores, I'm not sure the event offers much replay value beyond completing those weekly quests for the limited number of cosmetics. Obviously, the main point of this event is to obtain those high scores, but the absence of an in-game leaderboard or ladder, and with the only way to display those scores being a temporary podium, I personally don't feel very motivated at all to push. And that is assuming the podium is even there, is due to another bug. In some realms the podium is going missing. Had the tuning on the PTR been carried forward to live, I do think that the much faster pace would have provided enough of a gameplay enjoyment factor that it would have carried this event and guaranteed a lot more interest in doing repeat runs than is turning out to be the case. That all said, if you do go in with a group or even as a duo with one of the players tanking, it can still be quite fun for a few goes, but there's no doubt in my mind that this is not a worthy successor for the old Brawlers Guild. On Saturday, just a couple of hours after this video goes live, Blizzard will be broadcasting a live event set in Dastardly Duos, which will see players from Echo and Liquid go head to head in a series of 1v1 and 5v5 matches. Link down below with more details. And the last major news this week is a further update on the World of Warcraft team's long-term plans to bake more add-on functionality into the default UI, with a view to eventually limiting high-level combat helper add-ons access to game data. This update was primarily aimed at add-on developers, promising that changes that impact add-ons will be available for testing and preview a lot longer than is normally the case. But the biggest part of this announcement was an explicit confirmation that the team do intend to add a built-in damage meter along with major updates to nameplates, but the team are also emphasizing that there are going to be even more additions in the pipeline. It is really good to see the World of Warcraft team being willing to engage, even just in a limited fashion, with add-on developers, as this will, I think, help to reduce any potential collateral damage to non-combat and open world add-ons, which the World of Warcraft team do wish to continue to support. There was though one other thing that did catch my eye. In the previous communication from Blizzard, they heavily implied that the user interface improvements would be going live well before any add-on restrictions are brought in. However, in this announcement, the WoW team is now saying that most of the functionality would ship at the same time as the restrictions, if not sooner, which does cause me some concern. In my view, by far the best way for the dev team to achieve their goal of making add-ons feel less mandatory is to add the missing functionality into the user interface and, where appropriate, reduce overly complex mechanics in Raid and Mythic Plus, allowing players, many of whom would actually like to reduce the number of add-ons they use, to make the switch on their own time. Allowing players to make that transition on their own would require the dev teams to compete head-on with add-ons, something that would ultimately drive them to create better features which are far more likely to be accepted by players. It would also provide them with something to fall back upon in those cases where a new feature doesn't meet players' needs, massively reducing the downside risks of a project like this. Obviously, add-on restrictions would still eventually be needed, as especially at the top end, players will seek any advantage they can, and this does trickle down into the mainstream. But by seemingly planning to start imposing those restrictions up front, the team are creating massive risks for both themselves and players, both in terms of delivering negative gameplay experiences which will be very difficult and time-consuming to recover from, but also in harming player trust, something which remains very fragile since the Battle for Azeroth and Shadowlands eras. That all said, speaking as someone who tanks Mythic Plus to what I would class as a mainstream level, that is basically doing weekly 10s for gear, and who got there without using tools like OmniCD or Plater, I feel that as long as the developers deliver basic functionality, such as the ability of tanks to monitor threat and nameplates, these changes probably aren't going to have a major impact for the mainstream player base. But video gaming is all about the feels, and that means that even if the changes turn out to be objectively good, if players feel that they are being forced upon them, they may still feel subjectively bad, and that can ultimately be a much more important factor in deciding how players will react to what will be some major structural changes to the more competitive end of the game. And for the high-end player base, just as currently happens in Final Fantasy XIV, where add-ons have always been officially banned, those players will simply end up turning to out-of-game overlays and mods, something that would ultimately just make that high-end scene even less accessible than it is now. But anyways, that's all for me for this week, which means it is time to hand over to all of you. Are you looking forward to being able to delete a ton of your add-ons? Or have the new additions to the UI just not been hitting the mark for you? Let me know in the comments down below, along with your high scores from Dastardly Duos. If you found this update helpful, entertaining, or even just plain annoying, then do let me know by hitting that like icon. And if you want to support my channel to grow and help me to make more of these videos along with my other content, then hit that subscribe button right now before you forget. And if you don't want to miss out whenever I release a new video, then as well as subscribing, you can follow me on social media. My links in the description down below as well. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.